The rain fell softly that evening, tapping against the car window like a quiet warning no one wanted to hear. Margaret sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring out into the blur of passing streetlights. Her son Daniel drove beside her, speaking in a calm voice that didn't quite hide the strain underneath. "You'll love the new nursing home, Mom," he said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They have beautiful gardens, good food, and friendly people. You'll be happy there." Margaret didn't answer. Her heart felt heavy, like it already knew something wasn't right. The road was long, cutting through empty countryside before a tall building appeared in the distance, gray, silent, and surrounded by mist. It looked less like a home and more like an old hospital, the kind that kept too many secrets inside its walls. When the car stopped, the sound of the rain faded, replaced by a deep silence. Margaret stepped out slowly, her weak legs trembling. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and disinfectant. She turned to her son and whispered, "It feels cold here." Daniel gave her hand a quick squeeze and forced another smile. "You'll get used to it, Mom. It's just a nice place. You'll see." Inside, the nursing home was clean but eerily quiet. The long hallway was lined with closed doors, each with a small nameplate beside it. The lights flickered slightly, humming above. A woman in a white uniform greeted them, tall, thin, with a practiced smile that didn't seem to reach her eyes. "Welcome to Silver Pines," she said softly. "You must be Mrs. Margaret." Her voice was polite, almost too polite. She shook Margaret's hand and turned to Daniel. "You can fill the forms at the reception. We'll take good care of your mother." Margaret looked at her son again, wanting to say something, maybe to ask him not to leave yet. But the words stayed stuck in her throat. She could see he was tired, his face pale from sleepless nights. She didn't want to make it harder, so she just nodded. Daniel hugged her tightly, whispered, "I'll visit you tomorrow," and walked away. Margaret stood in the hallway, watching him disappear through the glass doors. She didn't know then that would be the last time she ever saw him. The nurse guided Margaret to her room. It was small but neat, a single bed, a wooden table, and a window that looked out onto the garden. But something felt strange. The air smelled faintly of bleach and from somewhere far down the hall. She thought she heard a door slam, followed by a faint scream that was quickly silenced. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The nurse paused only for a second before smiling again. "Just someone having a bad dream, dear. Happens all the time." That night, Margaret sat by the window, watching the rain fall harder outside. She thought about her home, the warmth of her old living room, the sound of Daniel's laughter when he was a child. She wondered if she'd made a mistake letting him bring her here. The silence around her was too deep, too unnatural. The clock on the wall ticked softly, and every sound seemed louder in the stillness. Somewhere in the hallway, she heard slow footsteps. Heavy and uneven, moving closer, then stopping right outside her door. Margaret froze. The footsteps didn't move for a long time. Then suddenly she heard the door handle twist once, slowly, like someone testing it. Her heart pounded. She held her breath, staring at the door, waiting. But the handle stopped moving. Whoever it was walked away, their footsteps fading into the distance. Margaret sat still for minutes, afraid to move. When morning came, she barely slept. The same nurse came in, smiling too brightly. "Breakfast time, dear," she said. "How was your first night?" Margaret hesitated. "Someone tried to open my door last night," she whispered. The nurse's smile didn't fade, but her eyes turned cold for a moment. "You must have dreamed it. The doors are locked from the inside after hours. No one can enter." She turned and left, leaving Margaret uneasy. Later, at breakfast, Margaret met a few other residents. Most were quiet, their eyes distant, as if they didn't want to talk. One old man sat at the corner, staring at his untouched food. When she tried to greet him, he looked up slowly and whispered, "Don't stay here too long. They take people at night." Before she could ask what he meant, a staff member walked past, and the man immediately went silent, pretending to eat. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. That afternoon, she went for a walk in the garden. The air was fresh, but the place felt wrong, too quiet for a place filled with people. She noticed something odd. The garden fence had cameras pointing inward, not outward, as if they were watching the residents instead of protecting them. She frowned. Strange, she murmured to herself as the sun began to set. Margaret returned to her room. She thought about calling Daniel, but when she asked the nurse for a phone, the woman said, "Phones are only for emergencies. Rest now." The way she said it made Margaret feel even more trapped. She sat on her bed, the shadows growing longer across the floor. The ticking clock echoed louder than before. That night the air felt heavy. Around midnight, Margaret woke to a faint noise, a soft hum, like machinery running behind the walls. Then she heard it again, slow footsteps, coming closer. She turned off her bedside lamp, her heart pounding. The footsteps stopped outside her door again. A whisper came from the other side, low, almost impossible to hear. "Stay quiet tonight." Margaret's body went cold. She didn't know who said it, a nurse, another resident, or something else. She sat up, gripping her blanket tightly, listening. A few moments later, she heard a distant scream again, muffled, followed by hurried steps. Doors opened and closed down the hall. Then silence. She waited until morning, barely breathing. When daylight finally filled the room, she felt dizzy from fear and exhaustion. The nurse came again, calm as always. "Did you sleep well, dear?" Margaret didn't answer. She looked toward the window and noticed something strange, muddy footprints leading away from her door into the hallway. Her hands shook as she pointed. "Who was outside last night?" She whispered. The nurse followed her gaze, and for the first time, the woman's fake smile faded. "Oh, those," she said slowly. "Probably nothing." Margaret looked at her closely, realizing there was no warmth behind those eyes. Only something cold, something pretending to be human. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world looked calm again. But inside Silver Pines, something was happening that no one wanted to talk about. That night, Margaret decided she wouldn't sleep. She'd stay awake and find out what really went on in this place. Because somewhere deep down, she already knew something was terribly wrong here. And before the sun rose the next morning, she would be gone. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, painting faint lines across the small room. But Margaret didn't feel warmth. The air was colder than usual, and the silence seemed heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. She hadn't slept a single minute that night. Every sound, every creak, every shadow had kept her wide awake. Her eyes were red, her heart still pounding from what she'd heard. Those whispers outside her door. And the muddy footprints that no one seemed to care about. She sat up slowly and looked around. The room looked the same, neat, calm, ordinary, but she felt something different in the air. Something was missing. Her neighbor, Mrs. Hayes, who always smiled at her through the open door every morning, wasn't there. The room across the hall, which always had soft music playing, was silent now. Margaret stepped out into the hallway, her slippers brushing lightly against the cold floor. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals again, but underneath that, there was another scent, metallic. Like old blood. Down the hallway, a nurse she hadn't seen before was pushing a cart. The woman had a blank expression and moved with slow, robotic precision. "Good morning, Margaret," said softly. The nurse didn't respond. She just gave a quick glance and kept walking. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. Something was definitely wrong here. She turned to peek into Mrs. Hayes's room. It was empty. The bed was neatly made, and all her things were gone, as if she had never existed. She felt a sudden chill run through her. "Where's Mrs. Hayes?" she asked the nurse who had just passed by. The woman stopped, her back still turned. "Transferred," she said simply, her voice flat. "Where?" Margaret pressed. The nurse turned slightly, her eyes dark and cold. "Downstairs," and she walked away before Margaret could ask anything else. Downstairs, the word echoed in Margaret's mind all morning. She didn't even know if there was a downstairs. She had never seen stairs or an elevator leading anywhere. She wanted to ask the others, but at breakfast, everyone sat silently again. Forks clinked softly against plates, but no one spoke. The old man who had warned her before, the one who said people were taken at night, wasn't there either. His chair was empty. Margaret leaned closer to a quiet woman beside her. "Do you know what happens to people when they disappear?" she whispered. The woman's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her spoon. "Don't ask," she muttered. "They listen?" Margaret frowned. "Who listens?" But the woman didn't answer. She lowered her head and kept eating. That afternoon, Margaret went back to her room and sat by the window. The sky was cloudy again, gray and heavy. She thought of her son. Daniel had promised to visit that day. She waited for hours, but he didn't come. Each time the door opened, her heart lifted. But it was always just another nurse, always smiling too wide, always watching her too closely. By evening, when it became clear Daniel wasn't coming, Margaret began to feel something deeper, not just fear, but a strange sense of being forgotten. She looked at the window again and realized something odd. She couldn't see the road anymore. Only tall trees surrounded the building now, thick and dark, like a forest that hadn't been there before. At dinner, she finally spoke up. "I want to call my son," she said to the nurse behind the counter. The woman's expression didn't change. "Phones are not allowed after hours." "Then I'll use it now," Margaret insisted. The nurse's smile tightened. "I'll let the supervisor know." But she never returned. As the lights dimmed for the night, Margaret's unease grew stronger. She could hear faint movements outside her room again, slow, dragging footsteps, followed by a soft humming sound. It wasn't music. It was mechanical, like a machine starting up somewhere deep beneath the floor. Then came a faint cry, distant, but unmistakably human. Margaret stood up, trembling. She pressed her ear to the door. There were voices, whispers she couldn't understand, and then silence. She backed away slowly and sat on her bed, clutching the blanket tight around her. "I still remember that night," she whispered under her breath. The fear, the sound, the way the air itself felt alive. Her heart raced faster. Something was happening in this place after dark. Sometime past midnight, she heard the sound again, the door handle twisting. This time, she didn't freeze. She quietly moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. The hallway outside was dimly lit, but she saw shadows, 3 figures dressed in white, standing close to her door. One of them whispered, "Room 12 next." Margaret's stomach turned cold. Her room was number 12. She moved away from the door, breathing hard. Her eyes darted around the small room. She needed something to defend herself, anything. Her gaze landed on a small metal lamp. She unplugged it and held it tight in her shaking hands. The handle moved again, but this time it didn't stop. The door creaked open slightly, and through the crack, she saw a gloved hand reaching in. Margaret's instinct screamed at her to run. She swung the lamp hard, hitting the door with a loud clang. The sound echoed down the hallway, and the hand disappeared instantly. She heard hurried footsteps, retreating, whispers, and then nothing. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. Margaret's breathing slowed, but her fear didn't fade. She stood there in the dark for a long time, gripping the lamp, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't know who those people were or what they wanted. But she knew one thing now. They were taking people, and she was next. When morning came, the same nurse entered again, acting as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret. How did you sleep?" she asked cheerfully. Margaret stared at her, pale and trembling. "You were at my door last night," she whispered. The nurse blinked slowly, still smiling. "No one leaves their room at night, dear. It's against the rules." She placed a tray of breakfast on the table and walked out without another word. Margaret looked at the food. It looked normal. Eggs, toast, a glass of orange juice, but she didn't touch it. She felt dizzy, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. Then she noticed something strange again. There was a small white pill in the corner of the tray, one she hadn't seen before. A note beside it read, "For calm sleep." She didn't take it. She wrapped it in a napkin and hid it inside her drawer. Later that day, she saw 2 orderlies carrying a covered stretcher through the back hallway. She froze where she stood. The shape beneath the white sheet was small and still. As they passed, the edge of the cloth slipped for a second. She saw gray hair, thin and familiar. It was Mrs. Hayes' daughter knees nearly gave out. She stumbled back into her room, shaking, her eyes filling with tears. They weren't transferring anyone downstairs. They were doing something else. Something much worse. That night, she didn't turn on her light. She sat quietly in the dark, waiting, watching the crack under her door. She heard faint footsteps again, the same humming from below. And that cold voice whispering in the hall. Room 12, next. Margaret held her breath, tears running down her cheeks. She knew she couldn't stay another night here. Whatever was happening in Silver Pines, she had to get out. But the question was, how? The next morning came like a blur. Soft sunlight trying to push through the clouds, but the warmth never seemed to reach inside. Margaret sat at the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. Her thoughts wouldn't stop racing. She kept hearing the words from the night before echoing in her head, room 12 next. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those white uniforms, the gloved hand pushing her door open, and the stretcher carrying Mrs. Hayes' lifeless body. It didn't feel like a dream anymore. It felt real. When the nurse came in with her breakfast tray, Margaret forced a shaky smile. She didn't want to show fear, not anymore. "Good morning," she said softly, trying to sound normal. The nurse gave her the same fake, polished smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret. Did you sleep well?" Margaret just nodded, pretending to sip her tea. She noticed again the same small white pill placed carefully beside her toast. She wrapped it in a napkin and slipped it into her pocket when the nurse wasn't looking. She needed answers now. The whispers, the missing residents, the night footsteps. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. After breakfast, she decided to explore the place quietly. Maybe she could find something, anything that explained what was happening. The halls were unusually empty that morning. The usual quiet chatter was gone. Even the TV in the common area was turned off. She passed by the rooms one by one. Room 8, 9, 10, all empty. Curtains open, beds neatly made, no personal belongings. It looked like no one had ever lived there. Her stomach tightened. How many people had disappeared? At the end of the hall, she noticed a metal door she hadn't seen before. Heavy, gray, and without a handle. A small keypad was fixed to the wall beside it. So there really is a downstairs, she thought. Her heart started pounding faster. She leaned closer, listening. From behind the door came a faint, distant hum, like machines working deep below. She could hear faint voices too, muffled but real. She jumped when a voice spoke behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Margaret turned quickly. It was another resident, a tall man with thin white hair and sunken eyes. He looked tired, frightened. "You'll get in trouble," he whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. "They don't like when people go near that door." Margaret lowered her voice. "What's behind it?" she asked. The man hesitated, his face pale. "The basement," he said finally. "They take people there at night. They say it's for treatment, but—" He stopped. His hands trembled. "They don't come back." Margaret felt her heart sink. "Do you know what they do to them?" she whispered. He shook his head. "No one knows. But I heard things, sounds, machines, crying, sometimes screaming." He looked down the hall again. "If they know you've been asking questions, they'll come for you too." Then, before she could say another word, he turned and walked away quickly. Disappearing into his room, Margaret stood frozen for a moment. The hum behind the metal door grew louder, or maybe it was just her imagination. She backed away slowly, her hands cold with sweat. At lunch, she sat quietly at her table, but her mind was still down there, behind that locked door. She noticed something else strange. The staff kept glancing toward her, whispering among themselves. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, stood near the hallway the entire time, watching her. She could feel it. They knew she was starting to notice things. That evening, she tried again to call Daniel. When she asked the front desk nurse, the woman smiled politely. "Of course, dear. Just wait here." She waited almost half an hour before another staff member came and said, "Your son didn't answer." But the tone wasn't right. It was too flat to rehearsed. "Can I leave a message?" Margaret asked. The staff member hesitated. "We'll tell him you called," she said, turning away. Something inside Margaret broke, then a quiet, tired anger. She realized no one was calling anyone. They were lying. Maybe Daniel didn't even know what was really happening here. Maybe he thought she was safe. That night she made a plan. She wouldn't sleep. She'd find a way downstairs and see for herself what they were hiding. When the lights dimmed and the halls went quiet, sat in the dark, waiting. Around midnight, she heard it. The sound she dreaded and expected at the same time. The humming, then footsteps. Then a faint click from the hallway, like a door unlocking. Margaret slipped out of bed, her heart racing. She moved to her door and pressed her ear against it. Voices drifted through the hall. "Room 14 tonight," a man whispered. "Make it quick." She peeked through the small crack and saw two staff members in white coats pushing a stretcher. They stopped at a door just a few rooms away. She saw them enter quietly. Then, after a few minutes, they came out again with the stretcher covered by a white sheet. Margaret's legs nearly gave out. They were doing it again, taking another person away. She waited until they disappeared around the corner. Then she stepped into the hallway, moving as quietly as she could. She followed the faint sounds of their footsteps past the empty rooms until she saw them stop at the metal door. One of them typed something into the keypad. The door unlocked with a soft beep. Margaret crouched behind a corner, watching as the men pushed the stretcher inside. The door stayed open for a few seconds, just enough for her to glimpse what was beyond. A dimly lit stairway led down into darkness. The air coming up from below was cold and thick, carrying the faint smell of iron and chemicals. She saw flickering red lights and heard the mechanical hum growing louder. Then the door slammed shut, locking again with a heavy click. Margaret stood there, shaking. She couldn't breathe. She leaned against the wall, trying to calm her racing heart. Her eyes burned with tears. Whatever was down there, she knew it wasn't a normal medical facility. They were hiding something terrible. Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her, quick, heavy ones. She turned sharply and saw the tall nurse from before, her expression hard. "What are you doing here, Mrs. Margaret?" she asked in a cold tone. Margaret stammered. I was just looking for the bathroom." The nurse's eyes narrowed. "The bathroom isn't down this hall." She stepped closer, her shoes echoing on the floor. "You shouldn't wander at night. It's dangerous." Margaret nodded quickly, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry. I got lost." The nurse stared at her for a long moment before finally saying, "Go back to your room." Her voice had no warmth. Margaret did as she was told, her heart pounding with every step. When she reached her room, she shut the door quietly and locked it. Her breathing was unsteady, her entire body trembling. She sank to the floor, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What are they doing to us?" she whispered to herself. She sat there for hours, too afraid to move, until the first light of dawn appeared. But when she finally looked out her window that morning, something new caught her eye. Faint tire marks leading from the back gate of the building into the forest. The tracks looked fresh, like a vehicle had left during the night, and beside them, half buried in the mud. She saw something small and shining, a necklace. Mrs. Hayes' necklace. Margaret stared at it, her heart breaking. She knew then Mrs. Hayes hadn't been transferred. She'd been taken away, and if Margaret didn't escape soon, she would be next. The morning came too quickly, and Margaret's body ached from exhaustion. She hadn't slept at all. Her mind was still trapped in the images of last night, the stretcher, the basement door, and that cold humming sound echoing from below. She sat by the window, clutching Mrs. Hayes's necklace tightly in her hands. The metal felt cold, heavy, and real proof that what she'd seen wasn't some cruel dream. The garden outside looked calm and peaceful again, as if nothing strange had ever happened here. A few nurses walked by, smiling, greeting each other with fake warmth. Everything looked normal on the surface, but now Margaret knew better. She could see the act, the hollow smiles, the eyes that never seemed alive. She slipped the necklace into her pocket and decided she couldn't just sit there anymore. She needed help, real help. Maybe if she found a phone that wasn't monitored, she could reach her son. She knew she couldn't ask the nurses. They were part of this. She needed to find it herself. After breakfast, she pretended to be calm, talking politely, smiling when spoken to. But inside, her thoughts were racing. When the staff turned their backs, she quietly slipped into a side hallway she hadn't explored before. It was darker with no decorations, no cheerful paintings like the main corridors. The walls here were plain gray and the air felt colder. She walked carefully, listening for footsteps at the end of the hall. She found a half-open door leading into what looked like an old storage room. Inside were stacks of boxes, cleaning supplies, and broken furniture. And there on the far wall was a small black telephone mounted beside a clipboard. Her heart jumped. A phone dot. She rushed toward it and picked up the receiver. The line was dead silent. She pressed a few buttons. Nothing. Then, just as she was about to hang up, she heard a faint click and then static. She froze, holding her breath. "Hello?" she whispered. For a moment, there was only the soft crackle of static. Then, faintly, a voice came through, weak, broken, almost like a whisper. "Who is this?" Margaret's heart pounded. "My name is Margaret. I'm at Silver Pines Nursing Home. Something's wrong here. Please, I need help." The voice faded for a second, then returned. Silver Pines. It sounded confused. Maybe male, maybe female, she couldn't tell. That facility was closed 10 years ago. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she whispered. "I'm here right now. There are people here, nurses, residents." The line went dead. The phone clicked off completely, leaving only silence. Margaret stood frozen, gripping the receiver tightly, her breath coming in short gasps. Closed 10 years ago. The words echoed in her mind, twisting her stomach into knots. What did that mean? If Silver Pines had closed years ago, then who were the people here? What was this place? Suddenly, a sound behind her made her spin around. A flashlight beam cut through the dim room. Mrs. Margaret. It was one of the orderlies, a tall man with sharp features. His tone was calm, but his eyes were not. "You shouldn't be here," she stammered. I got lost." The man stepped closer, his shoes crunching against the dusty floor. "Come with me. You're not allowed in this section." Margaret nodded quickly, pretending to cooperate. But as he turned slightly to close the door, she grabbed a nearby broom and swung it with all her strength. The wooden handle struck his arm, and he shouted in pain, dropping the flashlight. Margaret didn't wait. She ran. Her legs screamed with effort, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She dashed down the hallway, the dim lights flashing as alarms began to ring somewhere above. "Stop her!" a voice shouted from behind. She didn't look back. She reached a corner and ducked into another hallway, hiding behind a cart full of linens. Her hands shook violently as she covered her mouth to quiet her breathing. Footsteps thundered past, voices echoing. "Check the east wing." She couldn't have gone far. She waited until the noise faded, then slowly crept out. She needed to find another way to call for help. Maybe the reception area had a line that actually worked. But as she made her way toward the front of the building, she noticed something she hadn't before. There were no exit signs. Not one. The doors she thought led outside were sealed or locked. When she finally reached the lobby, it was empty, too empty. The receptionist's desk was deserted, papers scattered, the computer screen flickering with static. Margaret hurried behind the counter and grabbed the phone there. Dead. No dial tone again. She slammed it down, her panic rising. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something that made her heart freeze. A small security monitor was mounted on the wall, showing 4 black and white camera feeds. She watched, her breath catching. One camera showed the hallway outside her room. Another showed the garden. The third, a dark stairwell. And the fourth, a room she hadn't seen before. In that fourth feed, 2 nurses stood beside a metal table. The camera angle was high, but Margaret could see enough. A body lay on the table, covered in a white sheet. One of the nurses pulled the sheet back, revealing a pale, motionless face. Margaret's knees weakened. It was the old man who'd warned her. She stumbled backward, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Then something made her freeze. The nurse on the monitor looked up straight at the camera and smiled, and as Margaret stared, the nurse reached toward the lens and slowly turned it, pointing it directly at her. Margaret gasped and spun around. The reception area was empty, but then she heard its footsteps again. Calm, slow, steady. Coming closer, she ran for the nearest hallway, ducking into a small room and shutting the door quietly. Her chest burned as she tried to breathe silently. Outside, the footsteps stopped. Then came a knock. 3 slow taps. Mrs. Margaret, a woman's voice, called softly. "You've been very bad. It's time to come downstairs." Margaret covered her mouth, trying not to cry. The handle moved once, then stopped. After a few seconds, the footsteps faded away again. She sat in the dark, shaking. Every part of her wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Not here. Not now. She had to think. There had to be another way out. Then she noticed something. At the back of the room, behind an old curtain, there was a small window high up, almost too small to crawl through. She climbed onto a chair and looked outside. It led to the back of the building, facing the forest. She could see the tire tracks again, leading into the trees. Her mind made a decision before her body did. She pushed the window open, the hinges creaking softly. Cold air rushed in. She took one last look behind her, then whispered, "I have to get out before they find me." She pulled herself up, struggling, her arms weak, her heart hammering. The window frame scratched her skin as she squeezed through. She fell onto the wet grass outside, gasping for air. The forest stood ahead, dark, quiet, endless. Behind her, the building loomed, silent but watching. Margaret didn't look back. She started running, each step heavy, each breath a fight. The branches scratched her arms, the mud pulled at her shoes. But she kept going, and somewhere far behind, faintly carried on the wind. She heard it again, that same humming sound from the basement. This time, it was louder the next morning. The sunlight poured through the cracks of the curtain. But it didn't feel warm anymore. The nursing home looked the same peaceful. Quiet, even comforting, but deep inside. Evelyn felt something was terribly wrong. She woke up feeling tired, as if she hadn't slept at all. The strange dream she had the night before lingered in her head. The sound of whispering voices coming from the garden. And the silhouette of a man standing under the old oak tree. She could still hear the faint echo of her name being called, slow and distant Evelyn. She sat on her bed, her heart beating faster with every second that passed. It was just a dream, she told herself, trying to calm down. But when she looked at her nightstand, something caught her eye. A small piece of paper lay under her glass of water. She was sure it hadn't been there before. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was a folded note, and inside it, written in shaky handwriting, were just 4 words. "Don't trust the staff." Evelyn froze. Her breath stopped for a moment. She looked around the room, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the door. Who would write that? Was it a prank? Or was someone trying to warn her? After breakfast, she decided to take a walk in the garden, the same one from her dream. The place was quiet except for the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. The old oak tree stood tall in the middle, casting long shadows across the stone path. As she walked closer, she noticed a man sitting on a bench near the edge of the garden. He looked old but strong, his eyes sharp and watchful. He was feeding breadcrumbs to the birds, and when Evelyn approached, he turned his head slightly, as if he had been expecting her. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said in a deep voice. "They don't like it when people start asking questions." Evelyn blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean? Who are you talking about?" she asked softly. "The staff," he whispered, leaning forward. "They act kind, but they watch everything. Cameras, hidden microphones, notes in your roomettes, all part of it. They don't want you to know what really happens here at night." Evelyn felt a chill crawl down her spine. "You're scaring me," she said quietly. "I'm trying to keep you alive," the man replied, his tone serious. "Do you remember the lady who stayed in your room before you? Her name was Margaret." Evelyn shook her head. No, what about her? She disappeared, the man said. Just like the others. They said she moved to another wing, but I know that's not true. She was taken late at night by the same nurse who brings your medicine. Evelyn's throat went dry. Why would they do that? She whispered. The man looked around carefully before speaking again. Because this place isn't just a nursing home. It's something else, something darker. They test things here. They take people who won't be missed and experiment on them. Evelyn couldn't believe what she was hearing. That's impossible, she said, shaking her head. This is a licensed care home. My son visited. He checked everything. The man gave a cold laugh. They showed him what they wanted him to see. They're good at that. Everyone thinks this is just a place for the old and forgotten. But at night, the lights under the West Wing turn on, and that's when the real work begins. A sharp breeze passed through the garden, carrying a faint metallic smell, like something burned. Evelyn shivered. Who are you? She finally asked. My name's Henry, he said. I've been here for 2 years. I've seen things you wouldn't believe. I've tried to warn others, but they don't listen. And then they disappear. He looked at her, his eyes heavy with sadness. You seem different, Evelyn. You still notice things. Don't let them make you forget. Before she could reply, a voice called from behind her. Mrs. Harris. There you are. It was Nurse Clara walking briskly toward them, her usual fake smile plastered on her face. You shouldn't be out here alone. It's cold this morning. Henry quickly stood up and stepped back, lowering his gaze. Be careful, he whispered under his breath before walking away. Clara placed a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Let's get you inside, dear. You need your rest. Evelyn looked over her shoulder, trying to see where Henry had gone. Vanished into the trees later that day. She decided to ask about him at the front desk. I met a man named Henry, she said. He told me he's been here 2 years. The receptionist looked confused. Henry, she repeated. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any resident by that name. Evelyn frowned. No, I saw him this morning in the garden. The woman gave her a polite smile. You must be mistaken, Mrs. Harris. Maybe it was one of our maintenance workers. Sometimes our memory can play tricks on us, especially in new surroundings. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway made her jump. She kept staring at the piece of paper on her nightstand, Don't trust the staff. Henry's warning echoed in her mind. Was she really losing her memory? Or were they making her think she was? Around midnight, she heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps outside her door. Then came a whisper, almost too quiet to hear. Evelyn, don't open the door tonight. Her heart raced. She wanted to look, but her fear kept her frozen in place. The sound faded slowly, leaving her in complete silence when she finally gathered the courage to move. She peeked through the small window in her door. The hallway was empty, but the security camera above the ceiling light blinked red dot. Someone was watching. Evelyn sat back on her bed, gripping the sheet tightly. Something terrible was happening in this nursing home, and she was right in the middle of it. She didn't know who to trust anymore, as the clock ticked past 2 a.m. She swore she heard a door open down the hall, a low hum, a soft dragging sound, and then a scream. A cold, sudden silence followed. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. The scream had come from the direction of the West Wing, the one Henry had warned her about. And when she looked at her wall, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint stain spreading through the paint, shaped like a hand. Her heart stopped. Something or someone was trying to reach out from the other side. The next morning came heavy and cold, even though the sun was shining. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the faint handprint on the wall. It was still there, pale, gray, and almost invisible unless you looked closely, but it was there. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as they brushed the spot. The wall felt cold, much colder than the rest of the room, like something behind it was draining all the warmth away. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination. That fear was playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. She hadn't imagined the scream last night. or the whisper that had warned her not to open the door. And she definitely hadn't imagined Henry. When breakfast came, she barely touched her food. The oatmeal was tasteless, and the orange juice had a strange metallic flavor that made her feel uneasy. Around her, the other residents sat quietly at their tables, moving like ghosts, no one talking. No laughter, no conversation. Just the clinking of spoons and the hum of soft music from the speakers above. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a waiting room for something darker. Nurse Clara stopped by her table with her usual smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris. You look a little pale today." "Didn't sleep well?" Evelyn forced a small smile. "No, not really. I kept hearing noises in the hallway." Clara chuckled lightly, her tone calm but distant. "Old buildings make lots of noises, dear. Don't let them worry you." She placed a small paper cup on the table with 2 white pills. "Here's your morning medicine." Evelyn hesitated. Henry's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't trust the staff." She looked down at the pills, then at Clara's face. "What are these for again?" she asked. "Just to help you relax and sleep better," Clara said gently. "The doctor prescribed them when you first arrived." Evelyn nodded slowly. When Clara turned away, she pretended to take them, sliding them under her napkin instead. Her heart was racing, but she felt a small sense of control return. If there was something wrong here, she wasn't going to make it easy for them. After breakfast, Evelyn went for her usual walk around the corridors. The West Wing was still off limits. The door at the end of the hall locked with a keypad and a sign that read, "Staff only." She had never seen anyone go in or out except late at night, when the hallway lights flickered and she thought she saw shadows moving behind that door. That morning, though, something was different. The door wasn't fully closed. It stood just a few inches open. A soft humming sound came from inside, a deep vibration, like machinery running underground. Evelyn looked around quickly. No nurses, no residents. The hallway was empty. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she stepped closer. She pushed the door gently, and it creaked open. The air on the other side felt colder, cleaner, almost sterile. The walls were lined with metal panels instead of wallpaper. Bright white lights buzzed above, and there was a faint smell of antiseptic and burning wires. This wasn't part of any nursing home she had ever seen. She walked slowly down the corridor. Doors lined both sides, most of them closed, with labels that read things like Observation Room 3 and Medical Bay. B. A low beeping echoed from somewhere ahead. Then she heard voices. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. "Subject 17 is still showing neural activity," a man said. "Increase the dosage tonight. We can't let another one wake up mid-procedure." A woman replied softly, "What about the records?" "Her son's been asking questions." "We'll handle him," the man said coldly, "like the others." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Subject 17. Was that one of the missing residents Henry talked about? Or was it her? Her hands shook as she backed away, but just as she turned to leave, she saw something through a half-open door room filled with hospital beds, machines, and monitors. But what made her stop was the figure on one of the beds. It was Henry. His eyes were closed, tubes running into his arms. His face looked pale and lifeless, but the monitor next to him showed a faint heartbeat. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. He wasn't dead. They had taken him. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Mrs. Harris. Evelyn spun around. It was Nurse Clara, standing a few feet away, her face pale with anger. "You shouldn't be here." I got lost," Evelyn stammered. Clara's voice turned cold. "No, you didn't." Before Evelyn could move, 2 orderlies appeared from the other side of the corridor. They grabbed her by the arms. "Take her back to her room," Clara ordered. "She's been wandering again." Evelyn tried to struggle, but their grip was too strong. As they dragged her back, she caught one last glimpse of the room of Henry's motionless body, and the red light blinking on the monitor. Back in her room, she sat on the bed, breathing hard. Her wrists ached where they had held her. A few minutes later, Clara came in with a clipboard and that same gentle smile. "You gave us quite a scare, dear," she said softly. Those areas are dangerous. You could have fallen or hurt yourself. Evelyn looked straight into her eyes. What's in that wing, Clara? What are you doing to those people? Clara didn't answer. She just smiled wider. You need rest. I'll bring you something to help you sleep tonight. And then she left, locking the door behind her. Evelyn walked to the window, her mind spinning. She could see the garden below, the same oak tree swaying in the wind. Everything looked peaceful, but she knew it was all a lie. She turned back to the wall, staring again at the faint handprint. And as she did, she saw something new. The paint had cracked slightly where the print was. A small slit had opened, just wide enough to see a shadow move behind it slowly. Like someone pressing their hand from the other side? Evelyn stepped closer, her heart thundering. She whispered, "Henry." There was a faint tapping sound. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Her knees went weak. She pressed her ear to the wall and a voice whispered back, faint, trembling, but real. "Evelyn, help me. They're coming." Before she could respond, she heard footsteps outside her room. The doorknob turned. She backed away from the wall just as the door creaked open. Clara stood there, holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Time for your medicine, dear," she said softly. Evelyn froze. Her eyes darted to the window, then to the door. She realized if she didn't act now, she might never wake up again. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she thought Clara could hear it. The nurse stood at the door, smiling softly, the syringe glinting in her hand under the ceiling light. The liquid inside was clear, but Evelyn knew it wasn't something harmless. She had seen too much, heard too much. This wasn't about sleep anymore. It was about control. Clara stepped closer, her shoes tapping lightly on the floor. "You've been restless, Mrs. Harris," she said in her calm, practiced tone. "The doctor thinks a stronger dose will help you feel more relaxed." Evelyn forced a weak smile, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't need it today. I just want to rest naturally." Clara's smile didn't fade, but her eyes grew colder. Now, dear, you know the rules. Everyone takes their medicine." She moved closer until she was just a few steps away. Evelyn could smell the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with something metallic. Her mind raced. "If she injects me, I'll never wake up." At the last second, Evelyn stumbled forward, pretending to trip on the rug. As Clara reached out to steady her, Evelyn grabbed the nurse's wrist, twisting hard. The syringe flew from Clara's hand, hitting the floor and rolling under the bed. Clara gasped in shock. "Mrs. Harris, what are you?" But Evelyn didn't wait to hear the rest. She shoved past her with surprising strength and ran for the hallway. Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor as alarms started to beep faintly in the distance. The hallway lights flickered. Doors stayed shut. No one came out. It felt like everyone was asleep. Or pretending to be. Evelyn turned a corner and saw the exit sign glowing faintly at the end. She ran as fast as her tired legs could carry her, breathing hard, her heart hammering in her chest. But when she reached the door, it didn't open. It was sealed tight with a keypad lock. "No," she whispered, slamming her palms against it. "Please, someone help me." Behind her, she heard footsteps echoing multiple pairs, fast and heavy. Clara's voice carried through the corridor, calm but sharp. "Mrs. Harris, stop. You'll hurt yourself." Evelyn spun around, searching desperately for somewhere to hide. Then she saw it a small maintenance door slightly ajar near the laundry room. Without thinking, she slipped inside and closed it quietly behind her. The space was dark and smelled of dust and damp air. Pipes ran along the walls and faint light leaked in from a vent above. She crouched low, covering her mouth as she heard the footsteps pass by the door. "Check every hallway," Clara ordered. "She can't get far." Evelyn waited until the sounds faded, then took a deep breath and looked around. The maintenance tunnel stretched in both directions. One side led deeper into the building, the other toward what looked like a stairwell. She whispered to herself, "Think, Evelyn, think." Her mind flashed back to Henry, the tubes in his arms, the cold light above him. "They're coming," he had said. She couldn't leave without helping him. But how could she? The West Wing was locked, guarded. and she was just one old woman with no strength and no plan. Still, she knew one thing. If she stayed, she would end up like Henry, trapped, silent, forgotten. She crept through the tunnel, her hands brushing the rough walls to guide her in the dark. After a few minutes, she reached a vent cover. Through it, she could see a faint glow-white light and movement beyond. She peered through the slits. It was the West Wing again. Doctors in white coats moved between glass rooms. Machines hummed softly. On one of the screens, she saw brain scans flashing rapidly, some marked with names she recognized from the resident list. And then she saw a new name appear on the monitor. Evelyn Harris's subject, 18. Her blood froze. They were already planning to take her next. She backed away, her knees shaking. No, 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 she whispered suddenly. A hand grabbed her shoulder from behind. She gasped and turned, ready to scream, but stopped. It was Henry. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but he was standing. Quiet, he whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. They'll hear you. Evelyn could barely believe it. Henry, I saw you. You were I escaped, he said. Not for long. They'll notice soon. He looked around nervously, his hands trembling. You were right to run. They're planning something tonight. The West Wing isn't a hospital, it's a lab. They take us when they think no one's watching. They say they're helping, but they're testing drugs, things that change how your mind works, how your memories fade. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. That's why everyone here seems so quiet, she whispered. So empty. Henry nodded slowly. They erase us piece by piece. But you still remember, don't you? That's why they want you gone. A low alarm sounded faintly in the distant, short, sharp beeps. Henry's face tensed. They know we're missing. We have to go where? Evelyn asked. The doors are locked. There's an old service elevator behind the storage room, Henry said. It leads down to the basement. There's a gate to the garden from there. It's not safe, but it's the only way out. They moved quickly, every step echoing softly in the tunnel. The air grew colder and thicker as they descended the metal stairs. Evelyn's breath came in short gasps. When they reached the bottom, they saw a rusted elevator door. Henry pried it open with a metal rod. Inside, the small cage-like lift smelled of oil and dust. He helped Evelyn inside and pulled the lever down. The elevator groaned and started to move slowly downward. For a few seconds was only silence, the hum of the machine and their breathing. Then, as they neared the lower floor, Evelyn heard something, voices. Containment breach. Someone said through a radio. Subjects 17 and 18 are missing. Lock all exits. Evelyn looked at Henry. His eyes were wide. They're talking about us, she whispered. The elevator stopped with a jolt. The doors slid open to reveal a long underground corridor lined with old pipes. The faint smell of earth and chemical fumes filled the air. This way, Henry said, leading her toward a flickering light ahead. They passed through another room, this one filled with boxes and broken wheelchairs. In the far corner, a large metal door stood slightly open. Fresh air leaked through the crack. Evelyn's heart leaped. The garden. She whispered that they were just a few steps away when a loud metallic bang echoed behind them. Henry turned sharply. "Go!" he shouted. Evelyn ran, her lungs burning, but when she reached the gate, she heard Henry yell her name. She turned backhand, saw two figures in white coats grab him from behind. "Henry!" she screamed. He struggled, shouting, "Run, Evelyn! Don't stop, run!" But before she could reach him, the door slammed shut between them with a heavy clang. The last thing she saw was Henry's terrified face through the small window in the door. Before he was dragged back into the darkness, Evelyn fell to her knees, pounding the metal with her fists. "Henry!" No. The echo of her cries filled the corridor. Then, slowly, everything went quiet again, except for the faint sound of the wind blowing through the small crack in the door that led outside. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold metal, tears streaming down her face. She was alone again, but she wasn't giving up. Not now. She looked at the faint light beyond the crack, the garden. Freedom Life, Fand whispered. I'll come back for you. Henry, I promise. Then she slipped through the narrow opening and vanished into the cold night air. The night air hit Evelyn's face like a slap. It was cold, sharp, and heavy with the smell of wet grass and soil. She stumbled out from behind the metal gate and collapsed near the garden stone path, gasping for breath. The wind rustled the leaves above her, carrying faint whispers from the trees, or maybe her imagination. She couldn't tell any more. The moonlight poured down on the quiet nursing home grounds. Everything looked peaceful again. The soft glow from the building's windows, the faint hum of the night lamps, and the scent of roses from the flower beds. But Evelyn knew it was all a lie. Behind those walls, something evil was happening. People were being taken, erased, and now Henry was one of them again. Her hands shook as she crawled toward the old oak tree. That tree had always caught her attention since the first day she arrived. Something about it felt wrong. The roots bulged from the ground, twisting like veins, and the soil beneath was oddly soft, as if it had been dug up and covered again many times. She sat under the tree, trying to catch her breath, when she noticed something glinting near the base of the trunk. It was a small metal tag, half buried in the dirt. She brushed it clean and squinted at the words engraved on it. Subject 09 terminated. Her stomach turned. There were more tags nearby, small, rusted, some half hidden under the roots. She dug with her trembling fingers, pulling out another one. Subject 10 transferred, and another. Subject 12 terminated. Our minds spun. Were these graves? Was the garden not what it seemed? She backed away slowly, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The gentle beauty of the garden now felt like a mask covering something monstrous. The whispers in the wind grew louder, like faint voices calling from under the ground. Help us. Please. Don't let them take us again. Evelyn pressed her hands over her ears and squeezed her eyes shut. No, 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 she whispered, rocking herself. This can't be real. Then a sharp noise cut through the air. A metallic click. She looked up and froze. Nurse Clara was standing by the garden gate, holding a flashlight. Her face was half-lit, the smile gone. Mrs. Harris, she said softly, you're not supposed to be out here. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, shaking. What did you do to them? She shouted. What is this place? Clara stepped closer, the beam of light hitting Evelyn's face. Her voice was calm to calm. You're confused. The medication helps with that. You just need to come back inside. Evelyn took a step back. Don't come near me. Clara sighed, her tone changing. Colder now? You weren't supposed to see that wing. We gave you chances to rest, to forget. But you didn't listen, and now you've seen too much. She lifted something from her pocket, a small black device with a blinking red light. What are you doing? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Ending the program. Clara said simply. She pressed the button. The ground beneath the oak tree began to rumble. Evelyn stumbled as the soil cracked open, and a low humming sound filled the air, deep, mechanical, unnatural. The roots shifted, revealing metal beneath the dirt. A circular hatch slowly rising. Evelyn stared in horror. The garden wasn't just a garden. Beneath it was a hidden facility. The hatch opened with a hiss, and cold white light spilled out. Inside she saw something that made her legs go weak, rows of glass pods. Glowing faintly, each one containing a motionless figure inside. People, residents, their faces were calm. Their eyes closed, wires running from their temples. Evelyn recognized some of them. The old man who used to play chess, the quiet woman who painted birds, and even Margaret, the lady Henry had mentioned. They weren't dead. They were asleep. Or worse, alive but not conscious. Clara stepped beside her, watching the pods like a scientist admiring her work. We preserve them, she said calmly. We study how the human mind fades, how memory erases itself with time. These patients were dying anyway, Mrs. Harris, were giving their last days a purpose. Evelyn turned toward her, furious. You're torturing them. You're playing with their lives. Clara didn't flinch. We're helping the future. We're creating ways to control fear, trauma, pain. Your son agreed to this when he signed the papers. You're part of it too. Evelyn shook her head violently. No, he would never. But deep inside, doubt crept in. Her son had insisted this nursing home was nice. He had seemed too eager, too calm. Maybe he didn't know. Or maybe he did. Before she could say anything, a low moan came from one of the pods. Evelyn's eyes widened. One of the figures, a man with gray hair and thin arms, began to move. His eyelids fluttered. His lips parted slightly, whispering something weak and broken. Evelyn. Her blood ran cold. It was Henry. She ran forward, slamming her hands against the glass. Henry, it's me. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, lost. He reached out, his palm pressing weakly against the glass. Don't. Let them. He whispered before his body jerked violently, the machines beeping faster. Clara pressed a button on her remote. The pod filled with white gas. Henry's body went still again. Stop it. Evelyn screamed. You're killing him. Clara's face remained blank. He was unstable. You saw too much because of him. It's time to end this. Evelyn grabbed a loose metal bar from beside the hatch and swung it wildly, hitting the flashlight from Clara's hand. Darkness swallowed the garden, and in the faint moonlight, Evelyn ran toward the open hatch. Mrs. Harris. Clara shouted behind her. You can't hide from the truth. But Evelyn didn't stop. She climbed down the metal ladder into the underground room. The air was cold and sharp, filled with the smell of chemicals and metal. She could still hear the faint hum of the pod's dot in the dim light. She saw control panels glowing, hundreds of names listed on the screens. Subjects 01 to 50, each with a different status. Asleep, erased, terminated. Her shaking fingers pressed random buttons. Lights flickered, alarms began to ring. One by one, the pods started to open. The residents, pale, weak, their eyes dull, began to breathe again. Some coughed, some cried softly. They looked confused, frightened. Evelyn shouted, Wake up! You refree. You have to get out of here. The floor trembled as red lights flashed overhead. A robotic voice announced, Containment breach. Security lockdown in progress. Clara's voice echoed from above. You can't save them, Evelyn. They don't even remember who they are. But Evelyn didn't stop. She grabbed Henry's weak arm as his pod opened, pulling him close. His eyes were unfocused, his breath shallow. It's me, she whispered through tears. You free now? We're going home. Henry tried to speak, but could only whisper one word. Run! Then the alarms got louder. Sirens blared. The walls began to close slowly, the hatch sealing itself shut. Evelyn looked up. I saw the faint light of the moon disappearing as the hatch door lowered. She pulled Henry's arm, dragging him toward the service tunnel. But behind her, something massive was powering up machines. Gears and the faint, horrible sound of something alive moving. Through the metal, she turned once more toward the rows of open pods and froze. Not all of them contained humans. Some of them were filled with things that looked like twisted experiments, human faces fused with machinery, eyes glowing faint blue. They were moving, crawling. Watching her, Evelyn's heart nearly stopped. Whatever was happening in this place, it wasn't just about memory anymore. It was about creating something entirely new. And now it was awake. Evelyn's breath came in short, desperate gasps as the underground chamber filled with flashing red lights. The sound of sirens echoed through the metal walls, each blaring note stabbing at her nerves. She gripped Henry's arm, but his body was limp, his skin cold. He was breathing barely. The air around them smelled like burnt metal and antiseptic, and the floor vibrated beneath her feet as if the entire place was alive and angry. The pods behind her hissed one after another. Some released normal residents, frail, lost, blinking against the light. Others opened slowly, revealing something that made her blood run cold. They weren't human. Not anymore. The figures that crawled out looked half human, half machine. Tubes ran through their flesh like veins of steel, and their eyes glowed with a dim blue light. Their movements were jerky, unsteady, like puppets waking from a long nightmare. They turned toward Evelyn, their empty gazes fixing on her as the sirens screamed above them. Henry stirred in her arms, his lips trembling. "Run," he whispered again. His voice was faint, almost childlike. Evelyn tried to pull him, but he was too weak. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly, even though fear was eating her alive. "We're getting out of here, both of us." From behind, a metallic voice broke through the alarm. "Unauthorized access detected. Containment units released. Protocol Omega active." Evelyn didn't understand what that meant until the mechanical things started moving faster. They were not attacking but scanning, turning their heads, their blue eyes flickering as if reading something invisible in the air. Then, all at once, they stopped moving and looked in the same direction, the stairs, leading back up to the garden. Footsteps echoed from above. Clara was coming. Evelyn felt her heart squeeze. She needed to move now. She looked around and spotted a maintenance tunnel at the far end of the chamber, its round door slightly open. She dragged Henry toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last behind her. Clara's calm voice carried through the chaos. "Mrs. Harris, stop this. You're destroying years of work," Evelyn shouted without turning around. "You're killing people. You're turning them into things." Clara's voice didn't rise. "They were dying, Evelyn. We gave them another chance. We preserved them mind and body. You should understand that. You volunteered once, too." Evelyn froze. The words hit her like ice water. "What did you say?" Clara stepped down into the room, the red lights flickering over her face. Her smile was gone. Her eyes were empty. "You don't remember, do you? You were our first success. Your body was fading, your memory failing. We rebuilt your neural network. You were meant to live peacefully here, without pain, without loss." Evelyn stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, I'm alive. I remember my son, my house." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Memories can be written. Mrs. Harris, you remember what we gave you." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. Her mind began spinning through flashes her son's face at the hospital. The drive to the nursing home, the garden, the whispers she thought she heard the first night. Were those real? Or were they just fragments of a story someone programmed into her? Henry moaned softly beside her. She looked down at him, desperate for truth. "Henry, tell me I'm real, please." Henry's trembling hand reached up and touched her face. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy and weak. "You're real to me," he whispered. "That's all that matters." Behind them, Clara raised the black device again. "I'm sorry. You weren't supposed to wake up like this." Evelyn's instincts kicked in. She grabbed the nearest metal tool from a shelf and hurled it toward Clara. The flashlight shattered, and the underground chamber plunged into half-darkness. Evelyn pulled Henry through the tunnel door and slammed it shut. Inside the tunnel, everything was narrow, damp, and filled with humming pipes. It smelled like rust and cold water. The red emergency lights continued to flash faintly, guiding her path forward. She half-dragged, half-carried Henry along, whispering encouragement through her tears. "Just hold on. Please hold on." The tunnel twisted deeper underground. Soon, she began hearing strange noises, again metallic scratching, faint voices whispering from the walls. Her legs ached, her breath came in ragged bursts, but she didn't stop. Then she saw something ahead, a small control room with glass windows. Overlooking another section of the facility, Evelyn pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was filled with monitors, each showing different parts of the nursing home hallways, rooms, and the garden above. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw one screen showing the dining hall. It wasn't empty. Rows of residents sat there perfectly still, their heads bowed as nurses walked between them. But something was wrong. The nurses weren't moving like people. Their joints twisted too smoothly, their motions perfectly timed. Identical. Evelyn leaned closer, realizing the awful truth. They weren't nurses at all. They were machines wearing human faces, masks on another screen. She saw something even worse, her son. He was sitting in an office upstairs, talking calmly to Clara. Evelyn turned up the volume on the console, her hands trembling. "She's not responding well to the adjustments," Clara said coldly. "Her mind keeps rejecting the false memories." Her son sighed. "I just want her to be at peace, Clara." She was suffering. "You said this would help her." "It will," Clara replied. "But if she continues to resist, we'll have to reset her entirely." Evelyn staggered back, feeling her chest tighten. Reset. The word made her sick. Her son's face on the screen looked tired, but not cruel. He truly believed this place was helping her. He didn't know what they were really doing. She looked down at Henry, who was breathing shallowly on the floor. "They lied to all of us," she whispered. "We were never meant to leave." Henry coughed weakly, blood at the corner of his lips. "Then make them pay." Evelyn turned to the console. The screen showed a layout of the entire facility. There, at the bottom, was a label: Main Power Core Access Restricted. She knew what she had to do. She dragged Henry onto a nearby rolling chair and pushed him gently into a corner. "I'll come back for you," she said, brushing his hair back. "Just stay awake, okay?" He smiled faintly. "You always were stubborn." Evelyn turned and followed the map on the screen. The tunnel stretched ahead into a darker section. The air grew hotter. The humming grew louder behind her. Distant footsteps echoed again. Clara was following. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears as she reached a massive door labeled Power Core Access. The keypad beside it was glowing red, locked. She remembered how the other screens worked voice recognition. Maybe this one did too. She leaned close and whispered, "Override system of Lynn Harris." "Authorization code," before she could finish. A voice spoke from behind her. "Authorization accepted." Evelyn spun around. Clara stood there, her calm smile returning. "You really thought I'd let you come this far alone?" Before Evelyn could react, Clara pressed a button on her wrist device. The door behind Evelyn slid open with a heavy hiss, revealing the glowing heart of the entire facility, towers of spinning machinery. Blue energy pulsing like veins through steel. "This is where it all began," Clara said softly. "The memory grid. It keeps everyone peaceful, including you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears of rage. "You're not saving anyone. You're just erasing them." Clara took a step closer. "If you destroy this, you destroy yourself too. You are part of it now. Every memory you think you own is stored here." Evelyn's breath caught. "Then maybe that's the price I have to pay." She grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it hard at the nearest control panel. Sparks exploded, the room shaking as alarms blared again. Clara shouted something, but her voice was drowned by the roar of the collapsing machinery. Flames burst from the cables, smoke filling the air. Evelyn coughed, her eyes stinging, but she didn't stop. She struck again, until the lights began flickering wildly. Clara lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. "You'll die here," she screamed. Evelyn met her gaze with tears and fury. "Then I'll take your nightmare with me." She wrenched free, slamming the metal rod into the glowing core. The light flared blinding white. The sound that followed was deafening, a scream of metal and electricity. Like the world tearing apart, Evelyn felt herself thrown backward. She hit the floor hard. Everything went silent. As her vision faded, she saw the lights around her dying one by one. The hum of the machine stopped. The red alarms went dark. Then nothing. Silence. And in that silence, she thought she heard a voice. Henry's voice. "Evelyn, you did it." She tried to move, to open her eyes, but her body wouldn't respond. The last thing she felt was the faint warmth of sunlight touching her face. And then everything went black. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was standing in the garden. The air was soft, warm, and quiet, the kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. Sunlight touched the grass in gentle waves, and flowers swayed in the light breeze. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply stood there, breathing in the scent of roses and clean earth, wondering if she was finally free. Or if this was something else. The nursing home building stood behind her. its white walls gleaming under the sun. Birds sang somewhere in the distance, and the sky was a deep, endless blue. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. She whispered softly, "Henry?" There was no answer. Her voice trembled. "Henry, please. Where are you?" A sound broke the stillness. A door creaked open somewhere behind her. Evelyn turned, and there he was, standing under the shade of a tree. Henry looked different now, healthy, calm, smiling. His eyes were bright again, like they used to be before the sickness. He walked toward her slowly. "You kept your promise," he said gently. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I lost you. I thought I lost everything." He nodded. "You did lose everything. But you found yourself again." She frowned, her voice shaking. "What do you mean? Where are we? Is this real?" Henry smiled faintly. "It's the only part that's real now. You destroyed the core. The system couldn't hold anymore. Everyone connected to IT. The ones who were trapped, the ones who forgot they're free. Some are gone. Some, like you and me, stayed." Evelyn looked around. The air shimmered slightly, like a reflection on water. "So this isn't the real world." "No," Henry said softly, "but it's our world now." She took a step closer, reaching out to touch his hand. It was warm, real enough to make her cry. "I remember everything," she whispered. "The nights, the nurses, Clara, even my son." Her voice broke. "He didn't know, Henry. He thought he was helping me." Henry nodded. "They always do. They make promises of peace, but they never ask if we want it." Evelyn looked down at her trembling hands. "Did we die, Henry?" Henry smiled gently. "Maybe, or maybe we just stopped being what they wanted us to be." They stood in silence for a long time, the garden swaying softly around them. The wind carried faint echoes, voices, laughter, fragments of lives that had once filled the halls of the nursing home. Evelyn turned toward the building again. Its windows were dark now, empty. The air carried no more hum of machines, no more whisper of wires. Just quiet. "I still remember that night," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "The night everything ended. I thought I was fighting to escape a prison, but maybe I was freeing the others." Henry stepped closer and took her hand. "You did? You saved them. Every memory they tried to erase. You brought it back. The truth never dies, Evelyn. It just waits." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun touch her face. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt no fear, no confusion, only peace. And then she heard something, a voice calling her name. "Mom." Her eyes opened. She turned, her heart trembling. Her son was standing at the gate of the garden. He looked exactly as she remembered him, tired, kind, with that same smile that always tried to reassure her. "Mom, can you hear me?" He called again. Evelyn's breath caught. She looked at Henry, who smiled faintly. "Go to him," he said. "You deserve to say goodbye." She walked toward the gate slowly, her hands shaking. As she approached, she realized there was a faint shimmer between them, like glass, separating two worlds. Her son reached out, his hand pressing against the invisible barrier. "They said the facility was destroyed," he said softly. "I thought I lost you forever." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You didn't lose me," she whispered. "I just had to find my way out." He pressed his palm against the glass again. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know what they were doing. I just wanted you to be safe." Evelyn placed her hand over his. The barrier was cool under her skin, but she could feel the warmth of his touch through it somehow. "I know," she said, her voice gentle. "You did what you thought was right, and I love you for that." Her son smiled through tears. "I love you too, Mom." The wind picked up softly, scattering petals across the garden. Evelyn could feel herself growing lighter, as if the air itself was lifting her. Henry's voice whispered from behind her, calm and peaceful. "It's time." She turned back to him one last time. "Will I see you again?" He smiled. "Always." And then the garden began to fade. The light grew brighter, washing away the shadows, the walls, the sky. Her son's face blurred into gold and silver. Evelyn closed her eyes, whispering, "Thank you." The last thing she felt was warmth pure. Endless warmth, then silence. Weeks later, in the real world, investigators combed through the burned remains of the nursing home. They found no survivors, only melted equipment, destroyed computers, and traces of strange neural wiring embedded deep beneath the ground among the ashes. One photograph survived, faded but clear enough to see. It showed an old woman sitting in a garden beside another resident, both smiling peacefully. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "We finally went home." If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Thank you for listening.